Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Chi Talks. I'm Javi here with Nona, and welcome to another episode. Quick quote here. Under heaven Chi is earth Chi. It is influenced and controlled by heaven Chi. For example, too much rain will force a river to flood or change its path. Without rain, the plants will die. Chinese believe that earth Qi is made up of lines and patterns of energy, as well as the earth's magnetic field and the heat concealed underground. These energies must also balance, otherwise disasters such as earthquakes will occur. When the Qi of the earth is balanced, plants will grow and animals will prosper. Also, each individual person, animal, and plant has its own Qi field, which always seeks to be balanced. When any individual living thing loses its balance, it will sicken, die, and decompose.
So welcome everyone. Today we are going to be trying to paint a picture of the global electric circuit. So in Qigong, we are mostly concerned with the small universe of the human being and not as much with what the Chinese call the large universe of the entire cosmos. Because we, in our practice, when you practice, have a Qigong, Qi energy practice, you take control of what you can, which is your own self, your own body. So that's why we focus on the human realm. But we are functioning within this larger cosmos, and there's a lot of microcosm, macrocosm interactions and relationships and similarities. So we're going to take one of our Chi Talk sessions to discuss that a little bit more in depth. And we're going to relate the global electric circuit to the human body circuit. And we're going to begin also exploring the current events of pandemics and talk about it in terms using a energy lens a little bit as well, and question whether or not our current energy landscape is serving us the best way or not. But first, looking at the natural energy landscape of the earth and kind of creating a lens for everyone. The Chinese are great at looking at the world through their energy Qi lens. It's even really ingrained in their language. Qi is in the vocabulary, and language really shapes the mind and the vision and the perspective. So we can do that a little bit more here in our Western world and our Western culture, and try to add an energy lens and build that and make that more robust. So I want to create a positive relationship to this energy lens. It's not all bleak and dark, but there are considerations to look at as well. So that's where we're going today. Our guest is going to be Arthur Furstenberg. He is the author of the book, The Invisible Rainbow, A History of Electricity and Life. He is a scientist and journalist who is at the forefront of a global movement to tear down the taboo surrounding the subject of electricity. After graduating Phi Beta Kappa from Cornell University with a degree in mathematics, he attended the University of California Irvine School of Medicine until he was injured by an Xray overdose, which cut short his medical career and opened his eyes to the world of electricity. So for the past 34 years, he's been a researcher, consultant, lecturer, and activist on the health and the environmental effects of electromagnetic radiation, as well as a practitioner of several healing arts. Welcome, Arthur, Dr. Furstenberg.
I do not have an MD, so
okay.
1 year short of an MD. But thank you for
My goodness.
having me on the show.
Thank you so much for being here. So I wanted to start a conversation by asking you about your own healing arts and maybe what kind of practice you might have for yourself.
Well, these days I am devoting myself full-time to trying to save the planet from an overdose of electricity, shall we say. Radiation from wireless technology and satellites and cell towers and everything else that we are swimming around in these days. I had, and I still do upon request, but a practice in Feldenkrais and Rubenfeld's synergy method. I have studied Qigong, I have studied Aikido, and I studied Shiatsu, and I have acupuncture books. So that's a very brief encapsulation of my background.
Very good. Thank you very much. And, you know, in your bio, you talk about the Xray injury that you received that did cut your medical studies short. Just 1 year, it's so close. But tell us about what that felt like to have an X-ray overdose.
These were dental X-rays, and because I had an unsuccessful root canal and the dentists couldn't figure out what was wrong, they kept on doing it over, and they sent me for full mouth X-rays, and during the course of a summer I had 40 to 50 dental X-rays. And during the last session I was sitting in the dentist chair, and the dentist turned on the X-ray machine one last time, and I felt something give way in the back of my skull, and I felt an electric current travel through me from head to feet and out my toes into the floor. That's what it felt like. And the next morning when I went into the hospital for rounds, I could feel electricity from every single piece of electrical equipment in the hospital. And I didn't last long after that. Long story short, I attempted to stick out my medical career and get an MD. And after various problems, I collapsed one day with all the symptoms of a heart attack. And that was a message to me that I was not going to survive medical school, so I left. And at that point, I was at UC Irvine Medical School, and I moved up to Mendocino to recover. So I know Northern California well.
Beautiful place in the world.
And we're both smiling, appreciating the trees, the air, the environment.
And that was my introduction to this whole issue. Because while I was still in school, I wrote my first paper on the subject. I went to the medical school library, and I wanted to see what was there that they weren't teaching us about electromagnetic fields. And lo and behold, there were shelves full of books on the subject, and we weren't learning about it. So I wrote a term paper titled The Effects of Radiant Energy on Living Organisms. That was back in 1981. And that was the beginning for me of this adventure, which has changed my life and set me off in a different direction.
Thanks so much for sharing that story. And there's so many questions. I'm curious to know, when you first started diving into those books, those publications, what were some of those first books, and did they start being published around those 1800s when electricity started to be, spread.
Yes, those books have been long forgotten. The books that were on the shelves of the medical school library were recent. They were from the 60s and 70s and
Right.
50s. Some of them, the research in the United States began tentatively in the 50s and intensively in the 60s and 70s. But there is a lot of lost literature that I review in my book from the beginning of the development of electrical technology. My book starts in the year 1746 in the Netherlands with the invention of the Leyden jar, which is a way to store static electricity. It was the first real harnessing of electrical energy, and back in those days it was used largely in medicine for electrotherapy, and also back in those days electricity was assumed by Isaac Newton and those who followed him, and all the electrotherapists who in those days called themselves electricians. It was assumed that electricity was the life force, or was closely related to it. And
so by using electric therapy, you could sort of stimulate a person's life force or an external life force and maybe inject it somehow for healing, rejuvenation? Is that accurate?
They used it to charge up sick people with either positive or negative electricity, static electricity. So they would build up a charge in their body of either positive or negative electricity, depending on what was desired for their particular condition. And there are credible reports from the 18th and 19th century of healing effects, including cures of even blindness and deafness and lameness. This was kind of a panacea. The difference being that this was, compared to what we think of as electricity today, it was quite subtle. And the positive effects only came with very gentle, minimal doses of electricity for very brief periods of time.
I see. So how long might a session last? Maybe 10 minutes or so?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
5 minutes, 4 minutes.
Interesting.
There were descriptions of turning the electricity on once a second for 4 minutes, and that's all. And they restored people's hearing, restored people's eyesight.
Let's follow this idea just for a second, and then we're going to paint a picture of the global electric circuit and also the human electric circuit. What I'm curious about is, in terms of the electric therapy, when we look at healing practices of old, and maybe even some of the healing stories of old, is this a similar strategy, and is the body having a similar response? I mean, in Qigong practice, we talk about charge, we talk about discharge, we talk about nourishing, which is kind of like charging, we talk about releasing, which is kind of like discharging, and so the strategies and practice sort of work in this way.
I think it's the same principle, yes, absolutely. There are methods of acupuncture that use small doses of electricity also. My opinion, it's not necessary, because when you put acupuncture needles into acupuncture points, what you are really doing is conducting atmospheric electricity into the body, so it's not necessary to supplement it.
Interesting.
So let's talk about that atmospheric electricity then a little bit.
Yeah, we took the opportunity to dive a little deep in the past couple of days, and look in the global electric circuit. And it's just really fascinating, because a lot of times when you're doing Tai Chi or Qigong, when people from the outside look at a practitioner, they're like, what are they swimming in? Because it looks like they're swimming.
Yeah, that's that's what I was taught in the method of Qigong that I studied for a little while. You gather the energy from the earth and from the heavens. Atmospheric physicists talk about the global electric circuit.
Okay.
And there is a circuit of electricity that flows at all times from the ionosphere, between the ionosphere and the Earth. If you look at it as negative charge, which way do the electrons flow? It's actually from the Earth to the sky, to the heavens, in fair weather. And then the circuit continues horizontally in the ionosphere, and it flows back to Earth rather violently during thunderstorms via lightning.
Mm.
And about 100 lightning bolts strike the Earth at all times somewhere on the Earth. And then the electric current flows back through the Earth, and it's a continuous circuit, sky to Earth, through the Earth, back to sky, through the sky. A continuous electric circuit. The ionosphere is charged to an average of 300,000 volts, and it's a source of high voltage, and the ionosphere controls the global circuit. The global circuit is extremely tiny. It's measured in picowatts, trillionths of a watt per square meter, and coincidentally, the electric current that flows through our bodies, through our acupuncture meridians, has also been measured, and it's also in the picowatt range. So it's a continuous circuit. We absorb it from the earth. We gather the chi from the earth. I'll read to you something from the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
They describe it, but in terms of chi instead of electricity. The pure yang forms the heaven, and the turbid yin forms the earth. The chi of the earth ascends and turns into clouds, while the chi of the heaven descends and turns into rain. And if you substitute the word positive electricity for yang and negative electricity for negative charge for yin, it's almost identical to the way atmospheric physicists talk about the global circuit. The way I model it is this circuit travels from heaven to earth. On the way, it enters the tops of our heads. It leaves the soles of our feet, or if you look at it in the other direction, we absorb the chi of the earth through the soles of our feet, through bubbling springs point, and the tops of our heads, the 100 convergences, connects to the heavens. And it's all one circuit.
So this is great. Thank you so much. We were struggling to make this bridge from the Qigong theory that we study to the work of the physicists. And to paint this picture, I just kind of want to give listeners an idea, and you can help me out with this. From the earth, there are layers of, I'll just use the general term, atmosphere, but we learned that the first layer over the earth is the troposphere, and then it goes up a certain number of miles. Then the mesosphere goes a certain number of miles. After that is the thermosphere, lower thermosphere, and then upper thermosphere. And then there's a magnetosphere. But help us get a clearer picture of these layers, and then also how the magnetosphere, maybe you can introduce the magnetosphere and tell us about that as well.
Yeah, the troposphere, basically that's the biosphere. That's the air that we all breathe. and starting somewhere above 50 miles in altitude, the atoms are increasingly charged, and when the atmosphere becomes significantly charged, it's called the ionosphere. And the ionosphere is usually defined as somewhere between 50 miles and 1,000 miles above our head. That's where electrons are stripped off of atoms, and we have oxygen ions, and we have free electrons, and we have high conductivity and electric circuits flowing throughout that layer. The magnetosphere is part of that, but it's much more diffuse than what we call the ionosphere. The ionosphere is the lowest layer of the magnetosphere.
Okay.
The thermosphere and there's the stratosphere. Those are they're all defined differently, and but for my purposes, the ionosphere and the magnetosphere are what control the electromagnetic environment of the Earth, upon which every form of life depends, because we are electromagnetic beings, and the chi that gives us health and life depends on this constant input from our environment, not just from food and water and air, but from electricity, from the chi of the heavens and the earth. We get our energy actually not just from the ionosphere. Where does the ionosphere get it from? It's from the universe, and the universe, the sun generates the solar wind, which impacts the magnetosphere and the ionosphere and the global electrical circuit. Where does the sun get it from? The entire universe is basically a sea of charged particles called plasma, which has a very high conductivity, and huge electric currents and magnetic fields swirl throughout the universe. So basically the whole universe is connected to us. The stars and the sun and the solar system and the Earth's and the different layers of the Earth's atmosphere and the global circuit and the circuit within our bodies, it's all one. It's all chi. If you study physics, there really are only two macro forces that physicists study. There are four fundamental forces, but the strong force and the weak force are only active within atomic nuclei, and otherwise there's gravity and there's electromagnetism. And what astronomers, most of them, fail to study is electromagnetism, and it's what biologists fail to study. And it's all super important, and it's all connected.
Who mostly studies electromagnetism? Which schools of thought these days?
Well, physicists, but it's specialized. The chemists don't study it, and they should. They study it to a limited degree. Astronomers don't study it, and they should. Biologists don't study it, and they should. It's all segmented.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was poking around online yesterday in preparation, and I came across the idea of our DNA as an antenna in its structure, and you know, a few of these scientific papers published, I'll have to pull them up in a second, but they were suggesting that it's picking up on messages, you know, electromagnetic messages from the cosmos, even, that our DNA molecules were perfectly designed to be antenna and receivers of energy. So I think there's a few people out there who have this energy lens and are working on in that very
yes there are a few, but
field.
Unfortunately it's not percolating out into the mainstream, And unfortunately, it's not having an effect on public policy, because we're being allowed to pollute our electromagnetic environment to death with no restraint whatsoever.
And Dr. Furstein, well, sorry, not doctor, 3/4, I would say. 3/4 of the way.
You can call me Arthur.
Arthur, thank you. I would say that after your injury, it was as painful and detrimental that was, it also gave you this new lens and an ability to sense what is going on in the energy world. Would you say that not everyone has that ability to sense, or do you feel that folks could develop that awareness?
I think that everybody has the ability to sense it, but they don't use that ability. That if people would pay attention, it's like anybody can practice Qigong, and you can learn to feel the energy, and but most people don't do that. And it's like I was totally ignorant of what healers called energy before I entered medical school, and I didn't believe it existed. But a lot of things happened to educate me and make me pay attention. I was forced to pay attention to save my life.
And we like to continue our practice and our journey with the notion of, well, we're always learning, and so any of these experiences, in life are just a learning practice. So one of the other things that we talk about when we're teaching, and even I've noticed in myself, and I think in the medical field people would also agree, that humans don't necessarily change unless they're up against a crisis, or they don't wake up to a need to change something unless they're up against a crisis. At least for myself, I was in a crisis situation, and I had my appendix had ruptured, and so I had to learn of the world of the microbiome after that. And even before that, I was quite healthy, and I was just trying to reach levels of athleticism through Kung Fu training and Tai Chi and meditation and Qigong. But it wasn't until after that practice that I had to study a little bit of science and learn of the microbiome and the digestive system, which is such a new and ever evolving branch of science in and of itself. And so I wanted to offer that. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I quite agree. That's been mostly my experience. Is that not always, but mostly it does seem to take some sort of crisis to open people's eyes.
So I heard you also say that we quite possibly might, with the satellites up in space, we might experience a rainfall of microwave, and unfortunately, this might be a crisis that wakes up, people. But however, could we go back to the electric circuit of the body and revisit the connection to heaven and earth? So in Qigong, we talk about the grand universe and the small universe. And in the small universe, we look at, or in the small universe as the body, we look at the lower torso area as the ocean of the earth. It's like the earth there, and the lowest portion of the torso, where the pelvic floor is, we look and see it as the deep ocean, and then in the middle heart area, we look as that as that's called the middle dantian. That's the representation of the human energy, within the grand universe idea, and then in the head of the body, that is the representation of the heaven energy. So as we are these, the micro of the macro, of course, in our micro, the macro is represented. Would you concur?
Yeah, I would completely concur in what you're saying. The problem is that we take the source as infinite and unthreatenable. I don't know how else to say it, but the problem with the satellites is that SpaceX is launching 60 satellites twice a month with a plan to populate the ionosphere with up to 42,000 satellites. And another company called OneWeb just applied for a fleet of 47,000 satellites, also to be located in the lower layers of the Earth's magnetosphere, which is the ionosphere. And so it's like we throw garbage in the ocean thinking that it's infinite and it can't be destroyed. Well, obviously nowadays we know, yes, it can be destroyed. And the Earth's electromagnetic environment, which we don't pay attention to, which we don't even identify with what's going on in our bodies. It's just there. We take it for granted. Yes, it can be destroyed also. And you turn on tens of thousands. I mean, even if you turn on hundreds of satellites, if they're right in the ionosphere, and each satellite is communicating with potentially thousands of cell phone and internet customers, you're putting billions of electronic frequencies into the global circuit, the source of life, or one of the sources of life, which travels through our bodies. So you're polluting the interior of our bodies with all these electronic frequencies. This is what I'm making noise about right now.
And I heard in one of your other interviews you were saying that electromagnetic energy needs to be metabolized somehow by the body and also discharged. And some of the effects of that are, I would say, irritability to anger and rage. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, so far that is definitely the case. That this is why people are on anti-anxiety medications and antidepressants and having ADHD and a lot worse. It's interfering with the operation of the nervous system, of the heart, of the brain. But my fear is that when we start polluting the source, the ionosphere itself, that this could well destroy all life on the planet, and in a very short amount of time. Not just make people angry. I mean, it could kill us.
That's a little scary.
Yeah, I'm scared.
Well,
and it's coming shortly. I'm monitoring this. I put out newsletters. I've actually been monitoring the satellite situation since 1998. It's why I became an activist, and not just a scientist. Also out of necessity, because I was living in New York City in 1996 when the wireless revolution began, when the telecom industry advertised cell phones in a big way, and their plan was to put a cell phone into the hands of every man, woman, and child on the planet. And one of the first places that this occurred was New York City. They what's now today called T-Mobile, was then called OmniPoint, erected antennas on top of 600 structures in New York City, mostly apartment buildings, and turned them on November 14th, 1996. And within 6 days, I left the city to save my life. I was almost dead. And that's when I had started my organization because I knew it was coming, the Cellular Phone Task Force. And I gathered CDC statistics and determined that, yes, indeed, I'm not the only one that this happened to, but the mortality rate increased in not only New York, but other cities around the country during 1996 and 1997 for several months after these systems were turned on, and it killed upwards of 10,000 people. I happened to have been in the position that I knew immediately what was going on. Mm-hmm. Most people didn't. But this has just continued to escalate, and it's why I'm still doing it. I didn't think I would still be doing it, but I have now. I'm in communication with hundreds of thousands of people all over the planet, and we're trying to figure out what to do because it's become an emergency.
So, how, like Javi said, this is a very kind of a frightening picture that you're painting right now, and it's very easy to fall into either anxiety or doubt or rejection of the idea for people, especially who don't already have an electric lens. You talk about it's the body and how it's going to be affected by changes in the ionosphere. What systems in the body would you say have this beautiful electric landscape to it that we are concerned about? How are they functioning right now in a normal, unpolluted situation?
Well, our nerves are electrical. They're modeled in Western medicine as chemical. That chemical messengers cause the transmission of nervous impulses along our nerves. But the Robert O. Becker, who wrote The Body Electric and was one of my teachers, that was in 1985. He put out that book, but I was in touch with him earlier. That actually our nerves are a very efficient and complex electrical transmission line. The conductive channels in our heart, the heart's pacemaker, when we actually have conductive channels that transmit the electrical impulses to our auricles and ventricles and that pump our blood. That's electrical. The signals between within our cells, within the mitochondria of our cells, when we digest our food, it all breaks down into simple sugars and amino acids and fatty acids. And the last step of metabolism occurs in the mitochondria, and it's called the electron transport chain. Why? Because electrons are transported from the results of digesting our food to the oxygen molecules that we breathe. And that's electrical. It's motions of electron within our mitochondria. Our cells communicate with each other via electrical systems. And what's completely ignored by Western medicine is the acupuncture system and the dantians and the electrical, which is also, they're being modeled nowadays as waveguides for millimeter waves and optical waveguides as well for communication within our body, between all our organs and all our cells.
One of the things that we try to do, because when we look at Qigong, it takes work to release your energy, to store your energy, to build energy, to have an awareness, to use your energy efficiently. And I wanted to ask you about this. So, the magnetic field of the body, do we know what makes up the magnetic field of the body?
Well, all of the, I would say the measurable magnetic field is primarily nervous activity and cardiac activity. That's why we diagnose diseases via electroencephalograms, electromagnetoencephalograms now. Electromyograms monitors the electrical activity of our muscles. Electrocardiograms monitors the heart.
So I wanted to ask you about original essence. So in Chinese Qigong, we talk about the three treasures, Jing, Qi, and Shen. So Jing is what's referred to as your original essence, which is what you gain from your ancestors and directly from your mother and your father. And this is thought to be stored in the kidneys and the sexual organs and connected to sort of life and creation. Then we have the Qi. The Qi is a byproduct of that, and then the Shen is the spirit, which we could say is connected to source. But one of the things I was reading in one of Dr. Yang's book, Our Teachers, he was talking about original essence. And I'll read a quote and I'd like to get your response. This may, excluding all other factors such as location, weather, etc., the strength of your magnetic field depends on the natural qualities of your body. This may be what the Chinese mean by original essence. It is analogous to the fact that when you place high-quality refined steel in a magnetic field, the magnet formed will have a stronger magnetic field than if you had used poorly refined steel. Since this magnet is stronger, the magnetic energy will last longer. Similarly, if you received high-quality original essence from your parents, your body's magnetic field will be strong, and the qi or electrical energy circulating in your body will be strong and smooth.
Yes. That is the teaching, and I believe it.
So could I ask then, maybe practices that help us to refine what we call refine and store original essence could help to maybe combat energy pollution?
Absolutely. Also, even people who do not practice Qigong are nowadays learning to practice grounding, because that helps discharge the electromagnetic pollution into the earth out of our bodies. All of that is correct. Yeah, I know people that were injured similar to me and studied Qigong and got their health back. I know people that studied, I know a woman that studied the Brennan method of healing, and when she really learned how to ground herself, she recovered her health. But there's a limit. There's a limit to how much we can pollute our environment and still be able to withstand it and even if we can learn to withstand it and to function regardless, I'm worried about the animals and the birds and the insects and the plants. It's like we can't live on a planet without them. We can't just take care of ourselves. We're part of the whole biosphere. We're part of the whole cosmos. We have to take care of it.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing your awareness to that. It's, in Qigong, it's a very individual self-practice. You take a hold of what you have most control and power over, which is yourself, and so but we are interdependent here. I mean, we just had an Independence Day at the beginning of this month, but my yoga teacher wanted to point out we should be also celebrating Dependence Day, where we recognize our...
I know a group of people who met here on Santa Fe Plaza to celebrate on July 4th, and they were naming it Interdependence Day.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Yeah, when we can recognize our interdependence, then we've gotten somewhere as a civilization and a species. So yeah, and speaking of interdependence, going back to what Javi mentioned about the gut biome, I have a little, our teacher tries to think about, he's mostly a mechanical physicist, an engineer as a background as far as science training, on top of being trained in Shaolin Gong Fu, Tai Chi Chuan, and Qigong. But he tries to put modern scientific understanding to the essence, the original Jing. And he says that what do you inherit from your parents? He talks about the hormones of the body, which enhance the metabolism and the energy essence, like the energy ability to convert, material and air into energy force. But I've been also thinking, what else do you inherit from your parents? You inherit your gut microbiome. We've been learning more and more that, and going through the birth canal, what you are enveloped in is your mother's gut microbiome. As you're birthed, the baby can inhale all this flora that now then resides in the lower dantian, the energy center. Could that, potentially be a battery source? All those, microbes that are more cells than your own cells combined. So you're more not yourself than yourself there. So I was thinking maybe that's part of the original essence, but also the mitochondria is also another energy source, and something you inherit.
And you inherit those, from your mother, actually.
Yeah. So a bunch of different ideas of how to interpret ancient Chinese wisdom into modern scientific thought. So I'm going to keep, meditating on that and trying to figure out where our essence really lies. And we're coming to the end of our show, not Dr. Arthur. I'm going to keep doing it. In my mind, you've reached that point here in your title. You don't need to have it from a medical institution, but in your research here, this great book, The Invisible Rainbow: A History of Electricity and Life by Arthur Furstenberg. We encourage listeners to go out and get this mammoth of a book here. Lots of insight into how to increase your lens of electricity as you look at the world and look at our modern life. Also a lot of resources, a huge bibliography at the end, which probably includes your teacher, a book I've also read as well, The Body, Electromagnetism, and the Foundation of Life by Robert Becker and Gary Selden. A really nice book there, talking about not just electricity in our body and our ability to, he was looking at our body's ability to regenerate parts, looking at amphibians and such as well. Really interesting book. How else could people connect with you, Arthur?
My organization has a website. I have two websites. One of them is info@cellphonetaskforce.org. If they want to email me, the website is www.cellphonetaskforce.org. And then we have the 5G space appeal, the international appeal to stop 5G on Earth and in space. And that website is www.5gspaceappeal.org.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us again. You've been listening to Chi Talks with Javier and Nona, and we are going to kick it back to our lovely engineer, Dorothy, for a few messages. We hope you enjoy the show. You can catch it again on replay at the website on the archives, kmud.org.
And any questions you can send to talkingchi@gmail.com. We'd like to hand those over to Arthur and continue the conversation.
That's talking QI is how you spell chi. talkingqi@gmail.com.
Arthur, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.